Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the North Fair Oaks Community Council meeting. My name is Everardo Rodriguez, and we're going to get the meeting started with roll call. If you could, Victor, please.
Of course. Chair Everardo Rodriguez.
Here.
Vice Chair Beatriz Cerrillo.
Here.
Councilmember Melinda Dubroff.
Here.
Councilmember Rosario Gonzalez.
Here.
Councilmember Linda Lopez.
Here.
Councilmember Rosado Lopez.
Here.
Councilmember Mary Martinez.
Present.
And Youth Member Yesenia Mendez.
All right.
Thank you. And
Sir.
for public comment, anyone may speak up to 2 minutes on any topic not on the agenda tonight. Please fill out a speaker's slip, which they would have available there at the table by the entrance with Maggie. The council may not discuss or take action on any items that are not on the agenda tonight. And I think we already have some public comment here. We'll just make sure. Okay. Myra Cano. If you could please walk up to the podium and speak in the mic, that would be great, because the session is getting recorded, and otherwise it won't be audible in the video. Thank you.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Mi nombre es Mayra.
My name is Myra.
Tengo 25 años de vivir en Redwood City.
It's been 25 years since I live in Redwood City.
Estoy aquí representando a la avenida de Tercera Avenida en Redwood City.
Here representing 3rd Avenue in Redwood City.
Tenemos un problema muy grave
So there's a big, grave problem
con los parqueaderos.
with the parking.
Desde el momento que empezaron a dar los tickets on Middlefield Road los jueves y viernes,
So on Thursday and Friday, when they start issuing out the infractions of parking tickets on Middlefield Road,
Saturdays and sábado y domingo,
Saturday and Sunday,
más o menos yo en 3 meses he pagado más de $1,000.
so more or less I paid about $3,000.
So, es triste la situación.
The situation is sad.
Tengo un hijo en la universidad.
I have a son who's at university,
En el momento que él vino a trabajar para ayudarse a la universidad,
and so when he actually had to go to work to go to the university,
le tocó pagar de tickets a $800.
he had to pay $800. When he came home from the university and to work, he had to pay over $800 in tickets.
Quisiera pedirles de corazón
So from the bottom of my heart, I want to ask you
que tratemos o que nos ayuden a todos los vecinos de la Tercera Avenida.
to try and help all of the people at 3rd Avenue.
Hay vecinos que tienen hasta 10 carros, 15 carros en negocios.
There's some neighbors that have like 10 cars, 15 cars, business.
Siempre están apartando parqueaderos.
They're always looking for parking spaces.
Si yo trato de parquear mi carro durante el día de lunes a domingo, yo no encuentro parqueaderos.
If I try to park my car from Monday to Sunday, I can't find a parking space.
I'm sorry, but your 2 minutes are over. If you can wrap it up and
Okay, so,
just summarize.
yeah, I'm sorry. Lo siento, necesitamos ayuda urgente.
Sorry, we need urgent help.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Thank you. Next, we have Ramiro Sanchez.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Buenas tardes.
Quiero hablar también sobre los parqueaderos, de que yo tuve un problema con una vecina que
So I also want to talk about
aparta
parking.
parqueaderos y le dije yo que me diera pues chance de parquear
So I had a parking issue with one of my
y
neighbors where I
me dijo
asked
que
him
no,
if I could get a parking
no me dejaba y quisiera lo que quisiera. Entonces yo no quiero problemas, yo tengo viviendo muchos años ahí en la tercera
So I lived there at Third Avenue many years.
y hay personas, como dice ella,
And there's some
que
people
tienen de 10 a 12 carros que nomás los mueven el día que pasa la barredora y los vuelven a poner y bien, gracias, no los mueven y no puedes decirles que los muevan. Entonces antes no había ese problema, pero empezó a haber ese problema de que tiene hasta 10, 12 carros sin moverlos. Y ahora que empezó a pasar la barredora los jueves y los viernes, pues no tenemos dónde parquearnos y son puros tickets que estamos recibiendo y no podemos pagarlos a veces.
And, you know, the infractions, we can't even pay them sometimes.
No sé qué se podrían ayudarnos a hacer algo
So I
o
don't
no
know
sé.
if you guys can do anything to help.
Y yo lo que no quiero es tener problemas con esa persona
I don't want to have issues with that.
porque les dices algo y ellos dicen, nosotros estamos pagando impuestos, pero creo que también tenemos derechos nosotros porque todos pagamos impuestos, ¿no?
Because we all
No.
pay taxes.
Y esas personas no razonan.
So there's no reasoning with those people.
Les dices algo y te quieren, tú sabes, sobajar mucho.
Mention something to them and, you know, it's like,
Y creo que no es justo.
and I don't think that's good.
Todos tenemos derechos, ¿no?
We all have rights, right?
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much.
Yes, señor Ramiro Sánchez, si después puede hablar con Mr. Mike Callaghy, es probable que le pueda aconsejar sobre su situación. I'm just saying that it is possible that maybe Mr. Mike Callaghy may have a couple of pointers in regards of parking.
Right. I'm not going to respond specifically to the comments, but I'd just like to say a couple things about parking in general. That cars cannot park in a residential area for more than 72 hours at one time. So we will, if we're notified of cars being stored on the street, we'll come by, we'll have the sheriff's office come by, the parking enforcement, and mark the cars, and they have to be moved. Spots on the street can't be reserved, even though it's in front of your house. It's public parking. Anyone can park there at any given time. And if there's abandoned vehicles, certainly those can be reported. We're happy to come out and mark those. If they're obviously abandoned, they'll be towed. If they're not, we'll mark them, and they have to be moved, or they will be towed. And we are working diligently. We have 2 parking enforcement representatives out there to really try to free up as much parking as possible. We're also, through code compliance, working with all the residents who have inoperable vehicles in their driveways to help them get rid of those in a meaningful way, get a tax reduction, so it frees up the parking on the lot for people to utilize instead of the street. So all those things are going on in North Fair Oaks right now.
Through the
Thank
chair,
you.
may I ask a question of Mr. Callaghy?
I'm just going to add something additional. And also, it is my understanding that it's not legal to put orange cones to kind of try to hold parking, right? So if such person does that, then Mr. Sanchez perhaps could call the sheriff's number.
Right. It's absolutely, yeah. You cannot reserve parking. No one has a right to park directly in front of their house. That would be nice. That is a public street, and people can park wherever they want. So if there's an open parking space, and you certainly have a right to it.
Okay. I'm sorry, Melinda. Maybe I should ask counsel, can we expand a little bit on this issue?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Okay.
There's an app called See-Click Fix that we can use to take pictures of graffiti or abandoned furniture on the side of the road to alert the county of code enforcement. Is there a way that we could take pictures also of, say, if there's a commercial vehicle parked in front of our house, to report that to code enforcement?
I think that's a great topic to bring up at our next neighborhood response team meeting to see if we can expand C-Click Fix to incorporate that. But I do want to, and thank you for bringing that up. I just want to remind everybody that commercial vehicles are not allowed in a residential area to be parked. They're certainly allowed for delivery, but you cannot park them or store them overnight there. So individuals, and I'm talking about the big box trucks, anything gross weight 10,000 pounds or more, it is in fact illegal to park it on a city street. And we will be and have been, the sheriff's office has been citing for that.
Linda, did you have a
Yes, through the chair.
comment?
I would like to request from the Sheriff's Department, they're going to be here next month giving their report, that we get additional information about where cars are being ticketed, because right now we just get a number. If we can have more detailed information about where cars are being ticketed more frequently and the highest percentage. I think it's, we've had several people talk about this. I want to see from the sheriff's perspective what it looks like.
Okay, we can try to get that.
Thank you, Linda. Next, we have Miss Anna Ingalls.
Good evening.
Mi queja son dos cosas.
Two things.
Yo estoy con el problema de las personas que, como todos sabemos, tenemos mascotitas
We all have pets.
y nadie limpia las calles y es un problema que las calles están inundadas de excremento. En los andenes ya no podemos caminar porque es terrible cómo está todo esto. Y por más que se le diga a la gente, es buscarse un problema con la gente. Y la otra queja es que nadie coopera en tener, todos queremos tener árboles afuera, pero nadie quiere limpiar y solo tenemos una vez por mes la barredora. Y ya la ciudad ya estamos. Eso es mi queja.
Muchas gracias, señora. Next, we have Gloria Regalado.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Mi pregunta es que el policía en la mañana que pasa la barredora, si yo por alguna cosa que no puedo caminar bien y se me olvidó mover mi carro, aunque yo ya esté prendiendo mi carro, el policía me da mi ticket. Entonces, pienso que ellos pasan a la carrera como a las 6, 6:30, poniendo tickets y yo pienso que no es justo, ¿no? Porque por alguna razón, si yo ya estoy prendiendo mi carro para moverlo, pienso que a lo mejor me podría perdonar para moverme y buscar otro lado. Es todo lo que tengo. Gracias, mi amor.
Gracias, señora. I just wanted to make a brief comment about that. It is my understanding that nobody can get ticketed unless it is within the time frame. Would that be correct, Mike?
Right.
Unless it is within the time frame that they're supposed to be moving their vehicles, so
That is-
not before.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. Mr. John Woodell, I have a question. Is your question in regards to tonight's topic, the presentation about the Dumbarton transportation? Okay, in that case, we're going to wait until after the presentation to get to your question. And Mr. Oscar Vanegas, you didn't state what your question is. Is not about. Okay, go ahead, please. You have 2 minutes.
Good evening. I was here about 3 months ago about a problem that I have with my garage. At that time, I told the city, the council about I live in Fair Oaks, so for that, our zone is R3. Redwood City is R2, so they have the right to have a garage or cottage in the back and legalize it. We don't. Seems like, I don't see no justice at all because it's been 3 months and still the same. In other words, we just cannot have another cottage in the back because it's illegal according to them. And I don't see why, since we pay the same taxes. We don't have any cutoffs. People like me, retired and all that, trying to figure how to make it living. And by having a cottage in the back, it's a little help. But they don't want to give any, any chances to have somebody living in a cottage on my zone. And I'm complaining about it because nobody does anything about it. I don't see why they cannot make it is a R2 zone. So that way, we can have a cottage because it is there. Anybody in Redwood City can have a cottage, like I said, okay, and it's legal, or they legalize a place like that. I don't see that it's fair because I'm paying the same taxes that everybody is. And back into the same thing on the parking, some people on 3rd Avenue, they just move their cars, okay, but they park another car that belongs to them. So in other words, they never lose the parking spaces, and because they have more than one car. And they're pretty smart, okay, because if they haven't noticed that, they got to move the car, what they're going to do, they're just going to park another car that belongs to them, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Vanegas. Just a brief comment about this. So the North Fair Oaks, we are dependent on the San Mateo County for our services and their regulations. And Redwood City proper, it is its own city, so many times the rules are different, even though you live right next to each other. But if the boundary is such, then, for example, in some cases, since you live in North Fair Oaks and depend on the county of San Mateo, then you would have to call the sheriff for any emergency that you may have. But if you live in the side of Redwood City, you would call the Redwood City Police Department, and so that is a distinction that exists. And the other thing is that my understanding is that the county of San Mateo is working on that particular issue that you just brought up. Is that right, Mr. Kalagi? Is in the works?
We're happy to come back with our building and planning department to speak about that. We'll agendize that and give you an update on where we're at with that, if that's what the council desires.
That'll be great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, Linda.
May I add that that's the area that will be targeted for the next phase of zoning? And maybe Lisa can help me. I believe that's going to be, the area around Spring and Fair Oaks. I think that's called 2B. phase,
You're talking about the
phase
of the
2B,
rezoning to
right.
implement the
That's going to
Northrop
be the
Community
next
Plan.
area that will be targeted to look at improvements, changes, whatever, in
Actually,
regards to zoning,
Yeah, at the moment, so we're
which
working.
I'm just bringing it up because that's the area, where'd he go? That's the area that I believe he lives in. Right.
Yeah, actually, at this point, we'll be moving on after we are completing the El Camino Real and Fifth
Right.
rezoning. The next phase is most likely the other section of Middlefield down by in this area right here, Middlefield Junction. So the Spring Street area would be subsequent to that. So, but I was just going to go hand this gentleman my card. I think he's actually concerned about second unit regulations, so I'll try to help him with that.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we'll move on to the first item of this meeting, the presentation by Sam Trans on the Dumbarton Transportation Corridor Study. Presentation will be given by Melissa Reguiado.
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Melissa Reggiardo. I'm the project manager for the Dumbarton Transportation Corridor Study. Wanted to mention a few things before I started my presentation tonight. First, we are in the process of collecting public comments on our draft study, and we'll be doing this through the end of September. Also, I want to mention that we've added a public meeting. It will take place on September 25th in Bellhaven, which is a neighborhood in Menlo Park. We want to further engage with the public, collect your comments, and discuss the study. So if you'd like to see this presentation again, you can come that night. But in any case, we're collecting comments tonight. I'll be writing down any notes, or I'll be writing notes from your comments. But also you can comment in a variety of other ways. At the end of the presentation, I'll provide you with my contact information. You can call me, you can email me, you can call, however you want to get in touch with me. I'm happy to take down your comments. And there's a few things I just want to mention right off the bat that we're investigating. By this point, we've already had a few meetings. I know what the hot topics are and where most of the comments lie. And so I just wanted to mention we've gotten a lot of comments about the bike ped path, which is something I'll talk about tonight. Under our preliminary recommendations, it's not being recommended, but I want to assure you that we are looking into whether or not we can fit it. There's a lot of differing opinions. But I am taking down your questions, and I will be looking into all of your questions. So I just want to assure you that we are already hard at work trying to get you some answers. So with that said, I'll start. So I just wanted to remind you that unlike previous studies of the Dumbarton Corridor, this study emphasizes both the highway bridge and the arterials on both sides of the bay, as well as the rail bridge. Most past studies really just focused on the rail bridge. But we thought it was important to develop a more holistic two-bridge vision that emphasizes transit improvements. And I want to note that Caltrans is the owner and operator of the highway bridge, and so anything that moves forward on the highway bridge itself or the arterials that we've studied would have to go through the Caltrans planning process. So this is a really early stage study, and for many of the improvements we're recommending in a preliminary way, they would have to go through additional planning. Samtrans, of course, is the owner of the rail bridge, and I also wanted to point out that we've really tried to focus on both short and long-term improvements and the phasing of those improvements over time. This is a snapshot of traffic on the Dumbarton Highway Bridge on a Friday afternoon. You can see that there are major backups on both sides of the bay, primarily on the arterials. And people that live on both sides of the bay in those areas can attest to the fact that congestion has recently worsened. And this is really because we've seen some recent explosive employment growth, especially in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. Generally, we see about 76,000 trips across the highway bridge each day, And traffic flow is very much directional. In the morning, we see about 80% of those trips headed towards the peninsula, presumably for jobs, and then that trend is reversed in the evening. Some headlines of our study. And first and foremost, the corridor requires phased improvements over time, all of which are subject to many challenges. The recommended improvements on the rail bridge, on the highway bridge, and on the approaches require consensus from a variety of parties, and we've attempted to list some of the important ones here. Also, there's very little public funding for any improvements in the Dumbarton corridor, particularly the reconstruction of the rail bridge. So in our study, we included a high-level analysis of public and private partnerships, though certainly additional study in this area would be needed. Of course, there are also environmental challenges, especially when it comes to the reconstruction of the rail bridge. And there are also challenges in terms of forging regional rail connections in the East Bay. So Samtrans owns the Dumbarton right-of-way, which ends in Newark, but we'd have to use Union Pacific right-of-way to get to Union City. The preliminary findings or recommendations that I'm about to present were developed based on a comparative analysis of alternatives. This analysis compared alternatives and they judged them on how well they met study goals. The first two study goals are listed here, along with some more specific metrics that we use to evaluate those alternatives. And the third and fourth study goals are here again with some more specific metrics underneath. And I just want to note at this point in the presentation that these are preliminary or draft recommendations. Anything that is selected to move forward to the next step will require further analysis. So whether that's additional planning, in some cases additional planning is absolutely needed, or further design. Our designs are very conceptual, like 10 to 15%, and certainly environmental analysis. So there is a process that any of these improvements would have to go through after this point. So I'll take you through the alternatives we studied, as well as those that are recommended for further analysis. And I'll start with short-term improvements, and then I'll proceed through the long-term improvements. One option that we examined in the short-term horizon, which we consider to be 2020, is enhanced bus service on the highway bridge. It includes 4 routes: the Dumbarton Express service, known as DB and DB1 as they exist today, as well as 2 new routes. One we're proposing from Union City BART to Menlo Park and Redwood City, and another would travel from Union City BART to Santa Clara County, so more specifically Mountain View and Sunnyvale, in an attempt to serve major employment destinations. Frequencies are proposed to be 15 minutes in the peak and 20 minutes in the off-peak. Short-term bus service would be accompanied by short-term approach improvements, and these approach improvements are primarily operational in nature, things that would help speed up that bus service. In the short term, those things are generally like transit signal priority, queue jump lanes, way to get those buses ahead of some cars. The full list is here. Short-term bus service on the highway bridge would cost about $50 million to implement, and it would produce a projected 14,000 daily transit riders across the bay. And so I want to point out that these are trans-bay ridership figures, not total ridership figures. We have those too if you're interested, but we're really emphasizing across the bay mobility or trans-bay mobility in this study. Because there are, frankly, not that many things you can do by 2020, it's just a couple years away, we're recommending that these are looked at further. Another option in the short term is a bicycle pedestrian multi-use path on the Dumbarton right-of-way from Redwood City to East Palo Alto. The bike pedestrian path was examined as an option that could be that could be paired with any higher capacity transit service. So that could be rail or bus. It's assumed to require a few overpasses at the following arterials that we've listed here, and the capital cost is about $60 million. I want to note that our regional travel demand model, or the model that we use to come up with ridership projections for our various alternatives, isn't so good at coming up with projections for a bike ped path. Therefore, we didn't feel comfortable directly comparing the bike ped path with these high-capacity transit options. They're very different things. And so we assumed that the bike ped path would be implemented as long as it could fit in that corridor, which is approximately 100 feet. As noted before, enhanced bus and supporting arterial improvements are recommended for further study for 2020. And again, a number of entities would need to be involved in getting this to happen. So we've attempted to list some at the very bottom here. The bicycle and pedestrian path is not currently recommended, purely because there's limited right-of-way, that 100 feet. And we believe, and I'll get to the details of this, but we believe the midterm alternatives that I'll present could more effectively utilize this space to move more people. However, as part of the study, we have suggested other bicycle improvements in the study area that could enhance connectivity to the highway bridge on both sides of the bay. This does include an alternative to the multi-use path on the Dumbarton right-of-way, which uses portions of the Bay Trail, both current and proposed, between Seaport Boulevard and University Avenue, with some on-street connections as needed. Also, any transit alternatives that we're recommending for a further look would be sure to accommodate bikes on board, whether it's bus or rail. And of course, as I mentioned before, we're looking at comments and suggestions that we're receiving about this and double checking that right of way with. And this table shows the right of way width required under ideal conditions, the most desirable spacing per mode. Of course, we acknowledge that we would need to reduce the ideal width of the busway to fit both rail and bus in that 100 feet. But again, this is something we are looking into. Targeted for the mid to long term, which we consider to be 2025 to 2030, is a combination of a couple different services on both the highway bridge as well as the rail bridge. So I'll start with the highway bridge. This includes further enhanced bus service, but this time it would be operating in express lanes on the highway bridge. Bus service would operate at greater frequencies with 10-minute peak service and 15-minute off-peak service. And you'll notice from this map that the bus service is proposed to utilize the dedicated Dumbarton right-of-way on the peninsula in the mid to long term. And we believe that this could further reduce bus travel times and also just make the service more reliable given its dedicated right-of-way and it doesn't have to compete with cars. We've also looked at a bus flyover connection from the Dumbarton right-of-way to planned express lanes on US 101. And we think this improvement, paired with the buses actually operating in the Dumbarton right-of-way itself, could help speed up bus service and make it a bit more efficient. This is a very conceptual drawing of that bus flyover connection. Essentially, it would go from the right-of-way down to US 101, providing continuous or dedicated busway or express lanes for that bus service. More capitally intensive approach improvements to help further speed up the bus service include the following. These are approach improvements that we're recommending for further study. We looked at some improvements that are not included on this list. If you're interested, we looked at Willow Road express lanes, which would actually have to be tunneled. The problem we ran into with the Willow Road express lanes was that the connection to planned express lanes on US 101 from Willow was really a difficult connection to make. Tight geometries, it was found that we would have to take some residential properties as well as one business. We said we're not interested in carrying that idea forward. So we shifted our focus to the next best thing we felt we could do on Willow Road, which are bus-only lanes. And in terms of an express lanes connection to US 101, an attempt to provide that continuous express lanes option from the East Bay across the highway bridge to US 101, we shifted our focus to express lanes on Bayfront Expressway with a connection to 101 at Marsh. Potentially, this improvement, though it needs further study, could move the more regional traffic off the highway bridge down Bayfront to Marsh, getting on 101. Although we've produced conceptual designs with some varying design options for each of these potential improvements, I just want to mention again that additional design and operational analysis is necessary. There are two potential configurations for express lanes on the highway bridge. One is a reversible express lane, or what we call a contraflow lane, that would provide one additional lane of capacity in the peak direction. This option would require a movable barrier, and it would operate a lot like the Golden Gate Bridge does today with a zipper vehicle. The other express lanes option includes one express lane in each direction, so we would keep the 3 lanes in each direction under that alternative. And if you remember from my last presentation, we were also previously looking at an option with 2 reversible express lanes with 2 permanent barriers, but this option was found not to fit so well in the current cross-section of the highway bridge, so we really decided to focus on just these 2. It's believed that express lanes on the highway bridge could be completed in the midterm under a fairly aggressive schedule. The option that implements one express lane in each direction is generally best in terms of increasing bus ridership as it restricts general purpose travel and pushes more people to transit. This also means that it produces more congestion than the alternative, which is the reversible express lane option, which essentially provides an additional lane of capacity. Essentially, we see per person minute delay go up for the one express lane in each direction option and go down for the reversible express lane option, though certainly this would only happen for a period of time. We all know when we build more capacity, over time it tends to fill up. Additionally, more capitally intensive approach improvements on both sides of the bay, as I listed previously, are identified for 2025 to further reduce those bus travel times. And in fact, we believe that the arterial improvements are the best shot we have of decreasing those bottlenecks. And lastly, the right-of-way to the US 101 connection for buses is identified as a midterm improvement, and we again believe that this could really help speed up buses and make it more reliable. In the long term, or 2030, further enhanced bus service operating on the highway bridge with greater frequencies is proposed. The capital cost of these improvements is about $850 million in the midterm, about $80 million in the long term. And these improvements together would generate about 21,000 daily transit trips across the bay. So these are being recommended to be looked at further. Also targeted for the midterm and the long term is what we call the rail shuttle on the rail bridge. And this is a commuter rail shuttle that would shuttle from Union City BART to Redwood City Caltrain at 15-minute peak and 30-minute off-peak headways, frequencies that are generally quite less than what we're proposing for our bus services. At least a portion of the rail shuttle to Newark could potentially be completed by 2025 per our aggressive schedule, with the remaining portion to Union City being constructed by the long term, or 2030. The first phase of the rail shuttle to Newark includes the reconstruction of the rail bridge, and we're proposing that it be a double-tracked facility. The capital cost of that improvement is about $975 million. Double tracking the rail bridge, we believe, would provide additional operational flexibility into the future. Basically, if you're going to reconstruct the bridge, you might as well provide future capacity. And the second phase of the rail shuttle would cost an additional $295 million. The rail shuttle would produce approximately 15,600 daily transit trips across the bay at full build-out, so that assumes that it would go to Union City. And while ridership for the rail shuttle is less than what is projected for our bus alternatives, it's generally still in line with existing rail services that we currently have operating in our study area today. So that includes BART service between Fremont and Union City, as well as Caltrain service between Redwood City and Palo Alto. The rail shuttle on the rail bridge, paired with the enhanced bus service on the highway bridge, together is proposed for further examination because we believe that they serve different travel markets. The enhanced bus on the highway bridge is very good at serving Tri-Cities to Peninsula trips with a one-seat ride. However, we think the rail shuttle has or presents the opportunity to serve longer distance trips, especially pending future coordination with services like ACE and Capital Corridor in the East Bay. And I'll talk a little bit more about this on the upcoming slides. We also looked at a busway alternative on the rail bridge, which is also considered a mid to long-term option. This option is generally cheaper because it doesn't include dedicated lanes in the East Bay, and you don't have to worry about those East Bay rail connections. Despite the fact that this alternative would produce a little over 18,000 daily transit trips across the bay, it's not being recommended to be paired with the enhanced bus service on the highway bridge, like the rail shuttle, because it's essentially duplicative bus service. Also, the busway on the rail bridge would not be able to forge those same seamless rail connections that a commuter rail could do with ACE and Cap Corridor. I also want to note that the busway, like the enhanced bus services that we've looked at on the highway bridge, generally performs better from a ridership standpoint per our travel demand model because we've modeled them at higher frequencies. So to summarize, the following is proposed to be looked at further for 2025. Enhanced bus service on the highway bridge would potentially operate in express lanes. For the purposes of this study, we're recommending the one express lane in each direction purely because it performs better from a transit perspective. Also proposed for 2025 are further approach improvements on each side of the bay, as well as that bus flyover I spoke about that would get you from the Dumbarton right-of-way to planned express lanes on US 101 to benefit bus service. And we actually did a model run that looked at the potential benefit of this, and it did increase bus service. And on the rail bridge, the rail shuttle to Newark with a double-tracked rail bridge is recommended for further examination. And of course, the total capital cost here of everything on both facilities is about $1.8 billion. Entities that would be necessary to involve in all of these improvements are listed at the bottom. So to summarize, the following is proposed for the long term, or 2030. Enhanced bus service on the highway bridge would start to operate at those higher frequencies, while the rail shuttle would be extended from Newark to Union City. The total capital cost is about $377 million, and again, entities that we need to involve to make any of this happen are listed at the bottom. And targeted for what we call the even longer term, or 2035, is the conversion of that rail shuttle to what we call the rail commuter, which is a service, a commuter rail service that would interline with the Caltrain main line on the peninsula. This option would send some trains from Union City BART to Redwood City and then direct to San Francisco. Other trains would head south, so they'd cross the bay, they would turn south at the Y, and then they would head to major employment destinations, including Palo Alto, Mountain View, and Sunnyvale before expressing to San Jose. These services would generally operate at 60-minute headways, so combined, your northbound service and your southbound service combined would be about 30-minute headways. As I mentioned, this option is seen as the longer term, 2035 or beyond, and just as important as interlining with the Caltrain main line is forging regional rail connections in the East Bay with other commuter rail services, like I mentioned, ACE and Capital Corridor. These regional connections could really expand the travel market that can be served by rail service, and we think will be essential in increasing that rail ridership in years to come. After the rail shuttle is constructed, the additional capital cost associated with interlining with the Caltrain mainline may be as low as $327 million, though certainly additional analysis is deserved in this area, given a lot of unknowns with not only the future of Caltrain service and what it will look like, but most importantly, high-speed rail. So this rail improvement, paired with the enhanced bus service on the highway bridge, as I described earlier, together would produce approximately 23,300 daily transit riders across the bay. And this is interesting to us because we see a very strong amount of riders from ACE transfers. And so to us, this signifies that the Tri-Valley and the Central Valley to Peninsula market for jobs is probably underserved. The potential for the Dumbarton service to connect to larger regional rail networks is also compelling as we continue to see jobs and housing grow in different parts of the region. And additionally, the combination of enhanced bus on the highway bridge and rail service on the rail bridge also performs best overall in terms of reducing automobile mileage. So to summarize, based on the comprehensive assessment that involved enhancing mobility, cost effectiveness, equity, environmental concerns, safety considerations, we're recommending a longer-term solution that focuses on both facilities. And this is a little bit of a departure from the typical alternatives analysis or feasibility study that really selects one or the other. And certainly it's different from previous Dumbarton studies that have been very much focused on only the rail bridge. But we think that this might be the best vision into the future and one that could provide a more sustainable solution to help get people out of their cars. I just want to note quickly that we also looked at a service similar to our rail commuter option that I described, but one that just had one track on that rail bridge, and basically that equates to less transit service. So we decided not to move forward with that. And let's see. So generally, though, for that alternative, capital costs would be similar, except you'd save a little bit of money in terms of you wouldn't have a double-tracked bridge facility, and O&M costs or operating and maintenance costs would be less because you'd be running less transit service. So the following is a summary of what's recommended in 2035 or beyond. The rail shuttles proposed to be expanded to interline with the Caltrain mainline. And we'd really have to look into forging those regional rail connections in the East Bay, particularly ACE, but also Capital Corridor. Total capital costs of the very long-term improvements could be around $400 million. There are various options for funding and financing. We've tried to list some of the important ones here. There's a small amount of funding for Dumbarton rail stations as part of San Mateo County's Measure A. And certainly, though, additional state and regional funding would be needed. A couple options there include SB1, the new state legislation that recently passed, as well as Regional Measure 3, which would be an increase to tolls. Additionally, we're also looking at the potential for private contributions, and of course, also the potential for state and federal grants. We're also looking at value capture mechanisms, and also which could take a few different forms, things like special assessment districts or maybe developer contributions. Like I mentioned earlier, we've also included a very high level of public-private partnerships and analysis in our study, but certainly additional study is needed in this area. And lastly, I want to mention that the phasing that we've proposed here tonight is merely just one way you could do it. Certainly there's a different phasing that we could come up with, a couple different ways to phase these improvements. For instance, if you didn't have as much money at a certain given time, maybe you could build a rail spur from Redwood City to Menlo Park as the first phase, and then you'd get across the bay in the second phase. And then I want to emphasize that, partnerships with entities like the state and Caltrans, ACE, MTC, really those relationships are needed to help form viable funding and financing options for these very, very large infrastructure projects. So in terms of next steps, we're presenting the preliminary recommendations at a variety of public meetings like tonight. Our draft report is posted on our website. And also, like I mentioned earlier, we're collecting comments all the way through September, which is about 45 days of comment collecting. And we're going to do our best to take down your comments and address them. Ideally, we'd get back to the SamTrans board asking for approval of those recommendations in November, but certainly this timing is based on how many comments we receive and how long it takes us to address them. And like I mentioned before, you can get a hold of me any which way you'd like. A comment here tonight is the same as an email, is the same as a phone call. So I'm constantly taking notes, trying to get down everyone's comments. So please let me know if you have any comments or questions. And so that concludes my presentation. I'll keep this up so people can take it down.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll open the floor for questions from the council members.
Okay, through the chair. So if the plan is to enhance service, what is the plan to increase accessibility? And I'm speaking specifically of our senior population, our handicapped, and our youth. So where does that plan play into this whole scheme?
Sure. Our study is pretty broad, like a very broad planning study with a relatively large study area. So I'd say that first and foremost, what our study does in terms of increasing accessibility is that we've suggested new stations where folks could get on. Even if you're not commuting across the bay, we think that there's a benefit for the local communities on the peninsula as well. In terms of very specific things, improvements, geared specifically towards seniors or folks with disabilities, our study doesn't get into that level of detail. But certainly we would need to get into that level of detail in future phases of study.
Thank you for that. My second question is, the 2035 new riders, where did that number come from, please? Or how did you come to that
Sure.
number?
So all ridership projections are produced by what we call the CCAG VTA travel demand model. So it's the travel demand model that's generally accepted and used for very broad, high-level planning studies like this. So it's a model that's actually produced and sort of managed by VTA in Santa Clara County. But usually at the start of a project, we take that model, we make necessary tweaks to make sure that it's appropriate for, San Mateo County. And because we were looking at transit options into the East Bay, we sort of supplement it where it needs to be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, through the chair.
Please.
You said there would be more stations. Would there be any station between, say, Redwood City and Willow Road, or Redwood City and Facebook, or where are the stations?
I think currently, without looking at my maps and my list of stations, there's a big station obviously at Redwood City and at Willow Road and Bayfront. We'd have a major transit center that is proposed to serve both rail and bus service. Certainly, if there was a reason that you thought there should be an intermediate station at a particular destination, we could look at that.
Would there be coordination to get where you could get on a bus here in North Fair Oaks and then go straight to the stations that you were talking about, Redwood City, and
I think
would that all be coordinated?
That could be discussed as this moves on to the next phase and where it's like you really start to map out bus routes. They're pretty high level at this point.
They're pretty what?
High level?
Oh.
They're not down to the detail. One more question about the bike path.
Mm-hmm. Go
So the bike pedestrian path seems like it's not exactly a part of the whole scheme here. Does one of the things that's concerned me about a bike pedestrian path is the maintenance of it and public safety. And I wondered if those same concerns would come up with the rail, with their, what kind of public safety services would be a part of this?
Yeah, so, we've been sort of agnostic as to who could potentially operate said rail services. I mean, Caltrain's sort of a logical entity to do it, but we don't really address that in our study. We want to keep it open. But certainly any rail service would sort of adopt Caltrain-like safety procedures and, adopt similar sort of public outreach for safety, like I know Caltrain is trying to increase. Yeah, all the same sort of methods would apply.
To the chair.
Yes, please.
And I have one question. What alternatives are you giving to people who live far than Newark? For example, Stockton, Modesto, because I know a lot of them who work here in Rose City, but they are tired, dealing with the traffic every day.
So traffic specifically on, you said Middlefield? Sorry,
No, and the traffic just to cross the bridge.
Oh, yeah. So so the idea, I think, generally is offer more transit options, and hopefully people will get out of their cars with increasing congestion. I mean, it's interesting. You sort of look at how our travel demand model operates, and at a certain point of desperation, more people switch to transit. And so more people will switch to transit if we offer more transit options and good transit options with high frequencies and generally good service, which is hopefully a one-seat ride, or at least an easy transfer. So first and foremost, we'd like to address the congestion in that way. Second, I think secondarily, we've tried to propose some specific approach improvements that can help route regional traffic a certain way in regional express lanes. Like, how do you get people coming across the bay that are making more regional trips? How do you get them off Willow Road, which is really congested with all those regional trips? Maybe the Bayfront Expressway to connection at 101 at Marsh is a way to sort of get them to 101 more easily and address some of that congestion. It's a tough question. I hope I got it.
Yeah, because if they live in Modesto or in Stockton, how they gonna? Are you going to have parking spaces for them to leave their car there and then, transfer to the some trams and to come here?
Yeah, so park and rides were definitely an important part of our study. One that we always hear about for Trans-Bay travelers is the Ardenwood facility in the Fremont area right before you get on the bridge. We're proposing an expansion of that facility. We did also look at, in the constraints of our study area, which at this point really just go to, Union City, we did look at other areas for, opportunities for shared parking, so people could, park at those shared parking spaces and then get across the bridge via transit. Those opportunities tend to be limited, but I will say that the rail alternatives that we're recommending need to be looked at a bit further to expand that study area into Stockton, into Sacramento, and at that point we would need to look at some farther out station areas or park and ride areas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah,
I have a question. It was stated that the bike ped path isn't popular, or wasn't being considered. Was this a conclusion on with the data that you collected, or was there dialogue with the bike coalition groups that are in the Bay Area? And what do they have to say about your conclusion?
Yeah, so the bike ped path, we all think it's a good idea if there's room, right? But we're really focused on how do we get the most people on transit, right? And so our study showed that, you get the most people on transit by providing really high capacity transit modes, so both rail and bus service. So because we're proposing both rail and bus service in that 100 feet of right-of-way, it's difficult to fit that bike ped path. Now, with that said, we know that there's a lot of differing opinions about the width you need for rail, the width you need for bus, the width you need for bike ped. So we are taking a second look at this as part of this process, right? So I've gotten a lot of really good questions, like, one that I really am looking into is, does the bike path have to be 12 feet? Because the minimum standard is generally 12 feet. But could we build something less than 12 feet legally? I actually don't know the answer to that. So I'm looking into things like that to see if we can accommodate comments, but I just don't know, right? But we are looking into it. So yeah, and we have outreached to Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. We had a meeting with them yesterday, so they're aware, and they're certainly providing us those really good comments and questions to look into.
One issue that that I like to point was that I didn't see any gasoline tax mentioned anywhere, or the collaboration of some of the counties that are involved or cities, if they're all in agreement about these in regards of funding. So is this something that is still being worked out?
Oh, yes. I'd love it if we could get some money from a gas tax, but probably not one of the most viable options at this point. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in regard to both funding and financing. Any of these improvements, they are not cheap. And certainly I think to get to the point where we can get our hands on some public funding, we would need to have multiple entities come together and help us do it. So there's much work to be done, probably over a number of years.
Thank you. Any other questions from council members? Okay, so let's have public questions. John Woodell.
Do I have a time limit, by the way?
2 minutes, please.
Okay, so I'll try to be real expedited here. There's so many things to comment on. I think if we saw this right-of-way as being owned by the public and Facebook gave $1 million to Ace Train, they wouldn't have all this bus stuff in there. So I feel like the right-of-way could be potentially being used as an opportunity to do some studies around using buses, which is great. Although I think that in reality, Caltrain's really focused on going San Francisco, San Jose, and if you're in San Jose late at night and you want to take a train north, there's no trains. The trains go from midnight south because the flow is to San Francisco. So I think if you basically said, gosh, we need a lot of money for electrification, modernization, grade separation, they should sell that right of way to Ace Train, and Ace Train would love to get people from a train from Stockton potentially all the way to San Francisco. I actually have taken the train to San Francisco for many years. I actually biked across the Dumbarton Bridge for over 4 years. Rain or shine, I didn't have a car to use at the time. So you can certainly bike there. I would say that if the thing is sitting there and it's going to be the lowest priority, it's going to sit, the right-of-way currently to Willow Road is going to sit rotting, I can see that people would see, well, why don't we just allow people to bike and walk on it? But the reality is if you've stood on a train station when a train passes at 80 miles per hour, it's horrifyingly dangerous. It's actually quite quiet coming up on you. So I would certainly hope that people identify the danger of putting bike and pedestrian right next to a rail. So, and I guess I've heard some comments from people, they don't really want to see a bunch of flyovers for things, for buses. I would propose that if Samtrans wants to get really aggressive, they should put something on ballot to say, let's paint big red BRT lanes from Newark all the way to 101. And if you want to pay a bunch of money to drive a car in there, I guess you could do that too. But all these other things really are workarounds because theoretically people don't have the will to paint BRT lanes on the Dumbarton. But that should be an opportunity for Samtrans to just put it on the ballot, see what people think. It certainly would allow people to get out of their cars, and that's the challenge. All this money that we're talking about spending is there's no option for people who are from Stockton all the way to Newark to get across the bay. So I would hope that they would, Samtrans would consider, again, selling that right of way to pay for upgrades they want for Caltrain, sell it to ACE or whoever wants to actually guarantee they're going to move forward on it, and consider doing something really aggressive with BRT lanes so that we could have very nice buses operating right away on that. I think that VTA actually does a pretty good job putting in great buses, and I'm probably out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Mike Morris.
Through the chair, I have a question. What is a BRT lane? Do you know?
Bus rapid transit, big red lanes for buses, which you see.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Morris.
Well, good evening. I live near Marsh Road.
Okay.
And the people in my neighborhood don't want a train going through their neighborhood. There's a lot of children, a lot of traffic, a lot of people in this Fair Oaks area. It's a very high-density location. There's already a train that goes to Menlo Park, Palo Alto, and Redwood City. Just increase the bus service and the shuttle service from those stations, and you would save a lot of money. You wouldn't really need this Dumbarton Rail. The Dumbarton Rail, it was set up to be a freight train, a rail service. It was never made to be a commuter train service. We don't know in 30 years or 20 years or 5 years what the economy will be, and we don't know if it will carry that many people that's projected. And we do believe that making it a pedestrian bike lane, the Dumbarton Rail area, would be better. It is wide enough in most areas. The fees and taxes are going to be really high, and we do feel that Facebook has a lot to do with this. One of my neighbors said that they're really a carpetbagger. They have a lot to gain by meddling in the politics and business of San Mateo County and this. And they want the taxpayers to pay for their employees to arrive at Facebook. Also, Facebook wants to build a huge city over in Menlo Park, and this has something to do with it. Like I said earlier, the study will, cost a lot of money, and this rail, I like the bus service better. And let me see, I have one more thing to say here. If the bus service will cover $13,700 a day, and then the train about $15,000 or $16,000, I say go with the bus. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Adrian Brandt.
Okay, so I've beat up on the study authors enough about the right-of-way width. So, but there really is this right-of-way is 11 miles. It's purchased for under $7 million over 20 years ago. And what I see right now with this study, this isn't the first one, but it's very roads and highways intensive, and the balance is pretty much skewed too far, I think, toward that. As Melissa said, whatever we provide will fill up, and that's the pattern that will dominate the future. So if we're going to do the hot lanes across the bridge or the express lanes, in order to cost reduce this project, instead of doing a busway on the rail right-of-way, which is very precious, a Trans-Bay rail right-of-way, instead of doing that, for 1.22 miles, because that's all it is from Willow to 101 along the rail right-of-way, why not continue the express hot lanes on Bayfront Expressway all the way to Marsh, where the study authors in a prior presentation have said they're already planning flyovers there. What this does is now you've magically removed the buses, this constant sewer of bus traffic behind all the homes in Bellhaven, and they've spoken out. They don't want that back there. You've taken that away. You've put it onto Bayfront Expressway, because you already have express lanes as they're proposing in the most congested, the most high traffic part, which is the bridge. So carry it on to Marsh, and instead take the busway off the right-of-way, and you have magically then, you easily have enough room plenty of room for a safe, a wide bike ped path, and 2 tracks and stations. You've removed the extremely high cost of the flyover bridge from the rail right-of-way down into the median of 101. So I think this is a huge win. It's going to cost reduce it, and we can get more done sooner that way. Also, on the rail shuttle service, they're talking about going to Newark. Makes no sense. There's nothing in Newark. They'd have to do a big parking lot. So instead, go to Centerville. It's only 3 more miles, and make that the initial station. So I have more comments, but I know, for respect of the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. or Mrs. Durham?
Penny Durham, and I live in North Fair Oaks. I haven't looked at the draft report, so I don't have any comments at this stage, but I just had a question. With regard to the rail, if you brought the rail bridge back to life and put trains across it, I'm always interested with trains where you put stations and access to them, because one of the problems with getting on a train is getting to a station, and if you have to drive to it. So there may be plenty on this in the report, I don't know, but my question is just regarding where people could get onto this train. And then very specifically in North Fair Oaks, when our planners were putting together the North Fair Oaks plan, they made there was talk of somewhere out there in the future making a sort of a transit connection place where the tracks cross Middlefield. And so specifically I wondered whether that had been considered by Samtrans.
Thank you. That Mrs. Adina Levin.
Good evening. My name is Adina Levin, and I have a question regarding this project. So I know that the earliest version of the project had not included weekend bus service, and I was wondering whether, given the feedback that's been coming in, whether there has been interest in weekend bus service, since there are people who have jobs that they work on the weekend, as well as people who do not have cars and may be interested in getting to where they're going on the weekend in addition to the weekday. Another question I had is with the express lanes, there's a proposal, there's a bill in Sacramento to increase the tolls on the Dumbarton Bridge to help pay for improvements that might include this project. And then there's a proposal to have express lanes, which would have an additional toll on top of that. And I was wondering whether there was any thought being given to provisions with regard to the toll to help people who have less money and might have a challenge paying for the toll. And then I have a comment as a member of the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. There was a question about information about bike use, and there is information from Stanford where they have looked at who is commuting how to their location, and also Google, and they both show that within a 5-mile commute, they show a 20 to 30% of people using a bicycle for commuting within that distance. So if there are people commuting between Redwood City, North Fair Oaks, Menlo Park, that could get a 20 to 30% if you have a really safe route. That is very recent information from those employers, so that hopefully is something that Samtrans will consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Ms. Elvira Davila.
Hi, good evening. And it's actually Elvira Davila, but close enough. Anyway, I'm a North Fair Oaks neighbor, And a concern of mine is that I live right behind the railway, and I also commute to work, and I see a lot of the buses. So I don't understand how your schedule will hold, if all the buses could hold it as that I see are going to Facebook, Google. There are already charter buses. So how is this going to affect them in any way? If they're already being commuted to those companies, would they improve or increase the ridership? Are we talking about them as well, since they already ride the bus there? Anyway, that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we have Mr. Randall Lane.
I live on 14th also, right next to the track, and I wanted to hear more information about what you're going to do, assuming the rail goes in, to lessen the impact to people that are right next to the track. I have a feeling with Facebook, it's obvious that at some point this is going to go through. So before it gets steamrolled through the neighborhood, I'd like to know up front, what are the things that are going to be done for the residences that are right next to the track. And then if I'm going to have a light rail right behind my house, it would be nice to be able to walk to a train station to hop on the light rail. If at some point I want to sell my property, that would be a feature, as opposed to having to disclose, oh, there's a commuter rail and my property value is going to go down because of that. So what would be involved, for instance, to justify a station at Marsh Manor or at Middlefield? What's the process, that the public input that would have to go into to justify something like that?
Thank you. And Mr. Guiaro, if you could comment briefly on some of these questions, comments.
Yep.
We would appreciate that.
Yep. So try to circle all of the questions I got. I've gotten down your comments. I think we got the comment where people get on at stations. So to the extent we could, we wanted to use previous Dumbarton rail studies as part of this study. Given that they were good studies and we didn't want them to be a total loss, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So at this point, there's a station proposed for Redwood City Caltrain, as well as the Willow Road Transit Center. There's no rail stations presented as of now in between. But getting to the last gentleman's comment, certainly none of this is set in stone. As I mentioned before, the rail service that we're proposing to be looked at further as part of this study would need to be looked at once again. I know that there's some discussion of an additional or a different station location in the East Bay. So certainly if we get comments during this phase about looking at that, I think we can address it. Let's see. Other questions. In terms of how this study interacts with employers and the bus services that they operate, that was definitely a component of our analysis in the ridership sort of section of our report. If you're interested, we do sort of identify how much ridership there would be for each alternative for our transit services being proposed, as well as company shuttles. And so what we generally find is that when we propose really, really high quality public bus service, ridership on the employer shuttles goes down. When we propose less frequent service, the ridership on the employment shuttles go up. So it's definitely connected, but basically, the better transit service we're able to offer, you'll see less employer shuttles under, the assumptions in our travel demand model. I think there could be a desire, I'm going to say this generally, from employers to run less bus service. Most of those employers are not in the transportation business and probably don't want to be, but there's not adequate public transit currently. In terms of lessening impacts for the folks that live near the right-of-way itself, so all of the impacts would be looked at in one of the next phases of study, which is the environmental phase. So in the environmental phase, you look at everything in pretty great depth, from aesthetic impacts to noise impacts. air pollution. Everything is looked at. Community impacts, that's another category of analysis. So this is a pretty broad study just to sort of kick around some ideas as to what moves forward to additional design. So like I said earlier, our design is at really high level, 5 to 10%. To go on to the environmental phase, we would need to produce more detailed designs, and then there would be an environmental process associated with that additional design. So there's a lot more study to be done. I think lastly, in terms of Adina's question about the new Stanford data, I don't know where she's sitting, have you sent it to us yet? Can you send it?
I will do that right now, sorry.
Yeah, no, please. It's not currently incorporated in our study, but I'd definitely like to look at it. And I think that's all of the. Oh, and yes, Adina's second question was, are we looking at weekend bus service? I think that if we get enough comments on it, I think that's something that we can address. That's a fairly easy addition.
Through the chair, I have some questions for her.
I'm sorry, but we won't be able to get through more questions because we have another presentation that we have to get through, and we just won't have enough time. So
Okay,
I think
I'll send them to you.
we need to
Please
move
do,
on.
yes. Again,
Yes,
send me comments anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I'd like to encourage everybody, if you have questions or comments, even if you made them tonight, I would encourage you to write to the email address or check out the website and continue the conversation that way so that you can get more information or your comments heard. Thank you. Next, we will have a presentation by Joel Leclerc from Planning and Building Department. And this is in the consideration of a draft comprehensive update of the county's subdivision regulations.
Good evening, council members. Thank you very much. I'm Joel Leclerc, Planning Services Manager with the county, and I want to thank my colleague David Petrovich, who helped me put this presentation together. Tonight we'll talk about what the project is about, the progress to date, and our responses to your comments from the prior meeting when we came to you last spring to talk about this project and get your initial input, and also to describe the proposed amendments and this new method of analyzing the impacts of subdivisions, looking at environmental and hazard issues, and then next steps in the process. So the subdivision regulations that the county administers are a process by which land is subdivided for lots are created for sale and or development. And the process also is used to make provision for public services that are needed to serve development, like streets and roads and sewers and the like. Our subdivision regulations were last updated in 1992, 25 years ago. In that time, there have been significant changes to the Subdivision Map Act, which governs subdivision regulation in the state. And we want to incorporate those changes into the ordinance so that we have an up-to-date ordinance guiding our decisions. And we also had a number of changes driven by things that we've learned over the last 25 years in subdivision. But basically, these amendments that we're proposing would modify existing terminology and provisions, as well as add new provisions to the ordinance. It would create a new process for analyzing the approach to incorporating hazards, environmental resources, and cultural resources into the consideration of lot configuration in subdivisions, and also address new types of subdivisions that have emerged since the ordinance was updated 25 years ago. I want to clarify, too, that the ordinance or the regulation changes in no way affect zoning or general plan. So, in other words, the land uses and intensity of development policies are not affected by these changes. So the process that we've been following, we started in January of 2016 to sort of developed the project approach, and during March and June of 2016, we did outreach and research, and we consulted with you and other councils as well as stakeholders and technical experts, and we've also spent almost a year now working with County Council and drafting the new regulations to integrate State Map Act changes and new improvements that the staff believes will improve the process for those seeking to subdivide land. We expect to, so we presented the findings of our initial analysis in July of 2016. And like I said, for a year we've been drafting. Now we're poised to get feedback from the councils, and then in preparation for a workshop before the Planning Commission. So we understand it's a 200-page ordinance. It's a lot of material for you to digest. So what we intended to do tonight was to roll it out, give you a chance to understand it, and engage with us over the next period of time with any comments and questions that you have prior to a workshop before the Planning Commission that would give you an opportunity to provide more feedback before we entered the more formal legislative process later in the fall, and that would involve presentations to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors. So we see this as the beginning of a couple-month public review process on these changes. So at our last meeting with you last spring, one of the issues that you raised with us was the preservation of historic and other significant trees, that they should be protected through the subdivision process. Now, we are addressing the protection of trees through the development footprint analysis that I'll cover in a minute, and we're also in the process of updating our tree regulations that we'll be bringing to you later, probably in the early winter, for your feedback. Also, you indicated that opportunities for creating parks should be a priority. The subdivision regulations already have provisions for the provision of parks as part of subdivision. Now, generally speaking, the law allows that you have to have a sort of 50-lot subdivision before you can require dedication of land. So what the county generally does is require for smaller subdivisions a provision of fees. And those fees collect, and they can be spent on purchasing land when enough has accrued. And so that currently is the general approach that we take. But as someone mentioned, the North Fair Oaks Community Plan, and that is a policy priority of that document to identify opportunities for additional park space in the community. And our Parks Department is also taking some leadership on that issue. So changes required for consistency with the Subdivision Map Act that we've incorporated include modifying provisions to that deal with how maps are prepared, what the content of those maps are, and how they're reviewed, provisions for extending expiration dates of maps, enhanced safeguards for tenants to purchase units that are converted to condominiums. So this is basically a tenant ownership set of policies, and it mainly focuses on the process that has to be followed in order for that type of subdivision to take place. We clarified our lot merger provisions and also added some improvements that might be required as part of a larger subdivision, and also and a number of minor text amendments. So those are summarized in a table at the end of the ordinance that we gave you copies of, and they list all the regulation changes, the section of the regulations that are changed, and the provisions of the MAP Act that required those. So the staff has also proposed a number of changes that we believe will improve the subdivision process, and including clarifying the existing definitions and creating consistency between definitions that are in the zoning regulations and the subdivision regulations so that we reduce confusion there, and also reconciling outdated text with current application review processes. So over time, over this last 25 years, staff has developed a number of process improvements that we wanted to codify in the regulations, and also including streamlining the certificate of compliance process, although we don't issue very many of those in the North Fair Oaks neighborhood. So in addition, we've proposed what is a development footprint approach, which is in response in part to your comments about protecting trees. So basically what this process does is try to front load an analysis of hazards, natural resources, cultural resources, other constraints to development that may not be reflected in a map, a subdivision map, or the lots that are configured on a piece of property. And then we found that if those issues aren't considered at the front end, then they come up later on and they're more difficult to deal with. So we felt that trying to front load this analysis in the subdivision process would enable us to create more viable maps that avoid some of these types of conflicts. So I'll walk you through a couple of examples of this analysis process. One is a bayside property that has some trees and a slope on it, and the other is a bayside property that has a creek running through it. So the first map that both of these will have, this is just a context map to show you the yellow parcel in the middle is the parcel that could be subdivided. This is a map that shows that parcel in some detail and shows the existing conditions, shows you where trees are. You got an existing barn, and there's this corner of this lot's fairly steeply sloped, and so that may have to be avoided for development. And so you have a number of protected trees surrounding the site. This map shows the results of the analysis to say, well, where are the areas where we should allow construction? This is a fault trace here, a hazard to be avoided, some trees, and identify those areas where development should not occur, and then try to configure a subdivision based on those considerations. And so what this map shows is a private street that enters here. You have a lot here with a development. It shows, this isn't a regulated footprint. This just shows that a decent-sized home could be constructed on that site. Similarly here, and at the same time, you have hazard avoidance area for the slope, a resource protection area for the trees, and these would be managed through conditions on the map, so that these areas would not be allowed for development and would be protected. Similarly here, you know, these trees would be protected, but you can, you know, this just demonstrates that you can provide access to this lot, to these building sites, and protect these resources, and that the lot configurations will allow for reasonable development. The other example that we wanted to share with you was a parcel that's somewhat larger but has a creek running through it and has some natural resources on it. So in this case, there's some wetland areas on the site with a creek running through it that has some buffer around it, as well as some trees that are protected by the county's tree ordinance. So what this map shows is an area where working with the staff, the owner would identify areas where development would not occur, and that leaves the rest of the site where development could occur. And then here's a hypothetical subdivision layout that shows how many lots might be created pursuant to the zoning that's allowed, that drives, you know, lot size requirements, and shows a private street, a flag lot, a number of, you know, uniquely configured lots that allow for reasonable development on them that may not exactly follow the normal, you know, lot sizes in a given district, but balance this idea of protecting these resources and allowing for development. So, and these all these examples are hypothetical; they're not real places. We purposefully created these types of, cartoons, if you will, so that we didn't want to tie these down to any particular property, but to really illustrate the concept. And so in a nutshell, that is the ordinance changes or regulation changes that we have proposed. The next steps for us, this is the fourth council meeting that we've held this month, and so our next steps are to, based on the feedback that we get here, to prepare for a workshop before the Planning Commission either in late September or early October. And then we'll be drafting our environmental document assessing the impacts of the regulations. And then we will, once we have had our public workshop, we'll revise based on the feedback that we get from our Planning Commission and the public at the workshop, and begin the formal adoption process in November and December and January of next year. And we would then, of course, once the Board of Supervisors adopts the changes, transmit them to the Coastal Commission for integration into our local coastal program. And with that, I'd like to answer any questions or hear your comments.
Thank you very much for your presentation. If council members have any questions, please go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. The first one, on the footprint analysis.
Yes.
Does a property then get identified as one of these four categories, Bayside Tree and Slope, Bayside Creek? Or are these types of terrain that...
That's a really good question. So we developed this typology. Basically what we tried to do was look at the kinds of subdivisions that we are likely to get and ones that we've seen recently. But these are not categories that we are proposing to create in the regulations. They're just simply descriptions of the kinds of subdivisions that we have seen or might see in the foreseeable future, but they're not in any way codified categories.
Okay, thank you. And how does the process for a developer in doing this footprint analysis differ from a regular just environmental impact report in terms of the flow, getting through that whole process?
Generally speaking, as I said at the beginning, the subdivision process is aimed at dividing lots that are consistent with the size and dimension requirements of the zoning that applies to the lot. That doesn't mean that we don't take into consideration these environmental, cultural, historical issues, but in the past, we've tended to more postpone detailed decisions about things like trees or how we're going to deal with a stream when people come forward with development proposals. And so what we're trying to do is to kind of bring that analysis a little more formally to the front so that we can be clear both with the property owner, with the public, as to what the future development of that subdivision might result in.
It gives the developer a better understanding of the scope of what they're doing.
We believe so.
The creating parks is obviously a real big priority, and funding, hopefully to get land or fund pocket parks or things like that. There's a section in here where it talks about that the park fees would then the city and county would then work to find out where the park would go. It 4.14 is the section number. I didn't mark it down, but it said city and county. Aren't all of these things just going to be county, or would the fees that we're getting in North Fair Oaks potentially create a city park in Redwood City or Menlo Park?
No, the funding that would be collected through fees pursuant to county subdivisions would be spent, and they're required to be spent in the county. And so, I don't see the city-county reference.
Section 7057.
Now, some of this, so the gray text, by the way, in here is incorporated from the Subdivision Map Act.
Oh.
So it's possible that in the course of incorporating that we quoted from the Map Act and brought in the word city when we meant
Okay.
county.
Fees are used as a specified radius that complies with the city's or county's ordinance. So it's just the county's ordinance that
Yeah.
we're worried about.
I mean, again,
Okay.
it's
All
a
right.
quote from the Map Act.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else has any questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Linda.
So I was trying to relate what I was looking at to North Fair Oaks, because a lot of it seemed to me has to do with the coast. But I didn't, so I got through most of it, but it's a really heavy-duty document, so, without a tutorial. But, so my question is, the definition of alley and sewer system, I'm trying to relate that to the area in Selby Park.
Mm-hmm.
Is it alley or is it sewer? Because I know there's sewer underneath the alley.
Well, in that instance, there's that's a really good question. So, in the 20s, the subdivision.
I'm sorry, it says storm drainage, and then there's alley and then sewer. So I was just trying to figure
I'm
out
sorry,
what's what.
What page are you on?
4.31.
4.31. As you point out, it's a lengthy document.
Yeah.
Okay. So these are on this page. It's talking about 7084 is talking about the criteria for enacting a storm drainage or sanitary sewer fee ordinance, and as well, provision of these facilities. So, generally speaking, the kinds of subdivisions that we've seen in the county recently generally don't involve the extension of new sewer service. Generally speaking, these are infill lots where, especially in North Fair Oaks, where the sewers already exist and people are simply tying into them. Now, if the sewer facilities are undersized or need to be reconfigured for some reason, then of course the developer is going to be on the hook for making those kinds of improvements in order for this subdivision to be developed. But we don't see, so for example, the examples that I shared with you, there are not a lot of large properties like the one with the stream running through it in North Fair Oaks where you might see, say, 20 lots developed. There are not, many properties like that. But there are properties like the first example I showed you where you might see 2, 3, 4 lots developed on or subdivided out of a larger piece of property. And then you have to grapple with the access issues and tying into existing sewers and making water service provision. And as we pointed out, dealing with the issues of protecting trees and other resources that the community values.
Okay. And one other question. The early assistance meeting
Yes.
on page 2.7, is that a process that would or could encourage neighborhood dialogue or not?
It could.
Okay.
Part of the reason that we've...
Or is that too preliminary? That's my question, Joe.
I think we always encourage developers to dialogue with the community early and often because we think that it yields better projects. This meeting that we propose in here was aimed at trying to ensure that the developer understood this new process or the subdivider. It doesn't. They're not necessarily developers, but that the property owner, understood this development footprint analysis process, and that they were really considering all of the resource and constraints that might arise in subdividing and developing the property. So we were seeing it more as kind of an in-house technical meeting where we would have a chance to ensure that they understood it and that we helped them through the process.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Joe.
Yes.
Your sewer question reminded me of another question I had.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. One of the things that concerns me are the gas lines in our community, and that they're older, and that development of a lot would add pressure to the system, and there's a lot in the news about that. Is there anywhere in here that calls out that issue? We talk about sewer and we talk about the groundwater and things like that. Is there a piece of this that's related to connecting with the gas lines?
Yes, and so when a subdivision is proposed, one of the things that's necessary is to consult with all the service providers to a site. So as you point out, gas is one of the important services that is provided to, say, new lots. Sewer, water, electrical, and so we require that the applicant confer with the service providers and demonstrate to us that exactly the kind of issue that you've raised about will the impact be such on the existing system that there needs to be some upgrades. If that's the case, then they will have to deal with that. And as we're seeing more dense development along, say, places like El Camino or Fifth or maybe on Middlefield Road, we're also going to be seeing undergrounding of utilities as part of that. So so there are going to be changes, and as new development occurs, and infrastructure will be part of that.
One basic question in order to understand this document is, so there are sections that have text that's been blacked out or stricken through. Are those texts taken away from the previous version?
Yes, that's a very good question, and I raced through the materials, and I should have taken a moment to explain this document to you. The gray text, this shaded text, as I mentioned earlier, is quotes or insertions from the Subdivision Map Act, from the State Map Act. The text that's stricken is, as you described it, existing regulation language that we're proposing to remove from the ordinance or from the regulations. And the bold text is text that is generated by the staff and our proposed additions to the regulations. So we wanted to make clear that we wanted to distinguish the MAP Act changes because those are really sort of housekeeping kinds of changes where we have to conduct our subdivision process consistent with the MAP Act. We don't really have it because of state preemption. We have to follow those regulations. And so we wanted to clarify that they're different from changes that our staff proposed where decision makers have discretion as to the wording and whether or not to include those provisions.
And then finally, you mentioned that there was sort of a time period where we could make additional comments or recommendations. When does that period end, and how can we make further suggestions?
So we have not specifically scheduled the workshop before the Planning Commission, but it's our intention to do it either at the end of next month, September 27th, or in or mid-October. I believe it's the 13th. So we would hope to get your feedback in the next 6 to 8 weeks on this proposed regulation change, and we'd be happy to engage with anyone who has questions or is confused by this rather lengthy document, and clarify anything that you would like us to clarify.
And can we send you an email?
Absolutely.
Is that the best way to
You
send the
can call
suggestions?
me, email me, send me a letter, whatever works for you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
To the chair, I have a question.
Please go ahead.
There is any website where this material is available?
Yes, that's a really good question. We have just today posted these materials on the website, so when you go to the Planning and Building website, and I apologize for not having it on the screen tonight, the Planning and Building website has a major projects section on it, and this is one of the major projects, and you'll find the materials that we gave you this evening on there, the staff report, the ordinance language, and the development footprint examples. And there's 2 more examples that we didn't show you tonight that are coast side examples, but those are there as well.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
If there's any, is there any questions or comments from the public? I don't think so. Okay. And then we will get the supervisor's report, if we could.
Good evening, council members. My name is Irving Torres. I'm with the Office of Supervisor Warren Slocum. And just one quick update that I want to remind the council members is that on Tuesday, September 12th, from 6:30 to 8:30 here at the Fair Oaks Community Center, Supervisor Slocum and Supervisor Canepa will be having kind of a community town hall here just to kind of hear from residents of North Fair Oaks on housing story. The County of San Mateo just recently completed its federal required assessment of fair housing. It's now taking comments from the public on the results of the study, and your input's going to help to determine, actually document barriers to integration and opportunities to housing, and then come up with goals to address fair housing in North Fair Oaks. And so there should be a flyer back there where you can get more information on the draft assessment. And yeah, we hope that you all can be there. And that's all I have to report for tonight, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Irving. Next, if we can get the county manager's report.
Yes, thank you, Chair Rodriguez. I think the council probably knows, hopefully you've all been past it at 3060 3080 Middlefield. The work on the parking lot is underway. It's a 50-day process, so we're into it for approximately 10 days now, I believe, so about another 40 to go. We're all very excited about that. We are looking now at really how to regulate that parking lot to ensure that it's used for the proper purpose of really turnover parking for the businesses along Middlefield Road. So we're initially looking at 2-hour time limits there, and there would be no overnight parking. In fact, it would be a tow-away zone in the evening hours, and mostly done so we can respect the neighborhood and the neighbors associated with that parking lot, so we don't have people coming and going all the night and people storing vehicles in the lot and taking up parking in the lot and keeping it clean and orderly. So we are looking at that as far as the regulations. The mural, we are in negotiations with the business owners with the wall that oversees that parking lot, and we'll be bringing that to the Arts Committee very soon. We believe we'll have a signed MOU on that very soon, and we're anxious to work with the the Arts Committee to really develop something that's going to be very enhancing to the neighborhood. Couple other things. The Fifth Avenue, we've noticed, Supervisor Slocum actually noticed and called to my attention that it could use some updating as far as beautification. Right now, there's some trees and median there and a lot of dead brush. We really, I think, have an opportunity here collectively to make a statement and really make that a grand entrance into North Fair Oaks with some incredible landscape architectural process there. So we're going to look at that. We'll bring it back to the board. We really want to do something special there that's kind of a wow factor, that really brings a beauty to that area. So we'll be bringing that back to you shortly, and I think there's could be a unique opportunity for a public process. We're in some discussions here, and we'll bring that back probably next month. I'd also just like to say that the other day I had an opportunity to go through the neighborhood and went through the neighborhood at Calvin and Dumbarton and saw the PUC lot there, and the weeds were 5 feet tall. I immediately called that to the attention of our planning and building department, namely code compliance, and they jumped on it, got a hold of the PUC, the SFPUC, and they were putting it high on their list because these weeds are like 5 feet tall. I haven't had an opportunity to go by. I do plan on going by tomorrow, but I'm hoping that it has been taken care of. So I just wanted to, if it hasn't, I just wanted to let you know that it's on the radar and something that we're concerned about, along with the other SFPUC lots throughout North Fair Oaks. We want to work with them. We want to obviously look at some of these for pocket parks, and we're in the process of doing that with the SFPUC. We'll update you as we continue those discussions with them. And the SFPUC lot for parking is progressing nicely. We're at 100% design. Now it's in the comment phase between SFPUC and our Public Works Department. We expect to wrap that up shortly, hopefully within a month, and then move forward with construction on that lot also. With that, that is my report, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. Does anybody have a specific question? Please go ahead.
You mentioned that there was going to be a mural, adding a mural where the parking lot would be, and you said the art community. I want to know what art community that is and how I can be a part of it.
Yes, the art.
I'm sorry, she wasn't mic'd. Let's do that again.
I'm going to ask again.
We have a North Fair Oaks public art group, and Linda could probably, she's been on it for many years, so she could probably speak to it better than I can.
So we have actually a mural initiative, and that's one of the locations targeted for a mural. Now that things are moving on it, where it's going to become a parking lot, and there's a big blank wall there. But Maggie, who's sitting right over there, can add your name to the list, Maggie. And I believe we have a meeting coming up in September. She can get all the information. And please join us. It's usually on a Monday, I'm sorry. About what time? 6 o'clock?
From 6 to 7.
And we usually meet at the Fair Oaks Clinic, right? So that's the way to connect and start, and join us, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Collegi.
I have a question for him.
Yes, please.
Yeah, you mentioned about the parking lot in Middlefield. Are the county have a plan to build more parking lots in different areas in North Fair Oaks based in the situation of the street parking?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we did complete a parking study along Millfield Road, and we'll be presenting that to the council at some point in time here. The study showed that there's actually, believe it or not, plenty of parking on Middlefield Road. That there's ample parking on Middlefield. It's the neighborhoods that are impacted, and we're trying to determine if that is by spillover traffic from Middlefield or just a lot of residential parking. And that's something that's very difficult to discern one way or another. We will have a net gain of a few parking spaces even after we complete the Millfield Road beautification project. I believe there's a net gain of 6 parking spaces. Though we take away, some of the, because we're going through to lateral parking, or parallel parking, we'll be taking away some of that parking, but we're gaining it back through the PUC lot and through the Millfield Road parking lot. So we'll bring that study back to you, to the council, and we'll digest that a little bit, and maybe in a study session, so you can really understand what the findings were.
I'm sorry, through the chair. It's more like 35, that we were going to lose 35 parking spots as a result of the redesign of Middlefield Road. Something like 35 or 45.
It's exactly, it's
And
like
so
about 40.
so they found, actually the county found that spot, and I guess you bought the land.
We did, and it was very expensive. We bought that
But
land.
it should make up for the imbalance that we would have once the redesign, takes effect. I think it's like 35,
Yeah, I think
40
we have
spots.
I think we have a net gain of about 6 parking
Yeah.
spots. Yeah.
Is there any, through the chair, is there any proposal for metered parking spaces?
Well, that's something we'd like to bring back to the council and really discuss. I mean, right now we thought we'd start off with 2-hour parking free, but at some point in time, this council may decide to put metered parking in. We're gonna proceed, especially along Middlefield. We're going to proceed with the at least the ability to do that in case we want to do that in the future, to create some kind of district that would use those funds to keep the sidewalks clean, or make sure or maybe enhance street clean, or whatever it may be, to create some funding mechanism to keep Middlefield Road beautiful. So we'll bring that back to the council, and we'll maybe even have a public meeting on that and get some input.
Go ahead.
Actually, can I request that the council get information on what's going on with the Merchant Association?
Yeah.
I know you're doing a lot of,
Right.
outreach and networking with the Middlefield Road merchants. It'd be great to get some information and like a report on what's going on with that.
That's good. Yeah,
'Cause
we'll.
we really never hear anything about it, but
Right.
anyway.
In fact, we talk about that weekly. So why don't we schedule that, Victor, for next month, and we'll have Mr. Calderon come in and give a report on how that's going.
Thank you. Do we have any council members' reports?
Yeah, I just want to mention that someone, a resident from Douglas Avenue, approached actually myself and Beatrice at a community meeting last week, and he looked real familiar, and I go, oh, I remember you. And sure enough, he had come to the council over a year ago with an issue about alcoholics that were loitering and urinating and harassing his family on Douglas. Turns out that he lives on the city side. We referred the case to the sheriff. Sheriff, I guess, referred it to Redwood City PD. Redwood City PD hasn't done anything, so I took the opportunity and referred to Lieutenant Corpus. So I know it's like a tennis game. It's going back and forth. So wherever the ball lands, I hope someone picks up the ball and does something with it. But just to give you a heads up, I emailed Lieutenant Christina Corpus, hoping that maybe she can put some fire under the Redwood City PD.
Yeah, and I do remember that also through the chair, sorry. And maybe we can have Lieutenant or Captain Corpus report out next at the next meeting on that subject.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was approached by a neighbor as well. And she lives on the corner of Middlefield and 9th. And she experiences what I see all the time, which are cars coming down Middlefield and making a U-turn at 9th. Well, actually, no, they're coming, I'm sorry, from semicircular. And because they can't make a left to go to the Quick Stop gas station, they keep on going and then make the U-turn kind of across the street from St. Anthony's. So it goes on all day long. And she talked to someone with the county about it, and they said that we can't do anything about that until the Middlefield Road redesign is completed. And I was wondering if there was a process where we could get some kind of study just to see the problem, because it's unsafe, and her yard is just right there. And, I see it happen all the time. And I don't know if legally you can make it a no U-turn place, put up a sign right there. But I'm sure to do that, we'd have to get data first. Is there a way to do that before we complete the Middlefield Road project?
Through the chair, you know what I'll do? We'll bring this up to Public Works at our weekly meeting and ask them to come out and take a look at it.
Okay.
And there's a variety of things. I don't know if there's room for an island or no U-turn sign or whatever. We'll take a look at it, though.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Another question. I'm just wants to make a request to the county if they can make sure to do the study about the traffic and the parking in the street in the whole North Rocks, because the situation is in different areas, I think in everywhere, not just in North Rocks, also in Redwood City, but we want to focus in North Rocks. And next time when you, I know you say you want to bring the study information, but I'm just need to make sure if you check the whole city, to do that, how to fix this situation, because it's kind of like out of the control.
Through the chair, if I can just address that. That is a very difficult proposition because we know there's too many cars and not enough parking spaces in the neighborhoods. And we're trying to address that through a variety of means, and that is really addressing the abandoned vehicles, the commercial vehicles. And one other thing that we could look at, and we have proposed for certain neighborhoods, is to beta test permanent parking. So that you would need a permit to park in that neighborhood. And households would only be issued a certain many permits. So we've, we'd have to go through a whole process. We have not instituted that anywhere here in North Fair Oaks before. It has worked in some neighborhoods in San Mateo County, specifically a city I used to work for. And but it's also labor intensive to administer that program. So it's something that we can certainly discuss and see what the appetite is for that.
Thank you. Yeah, that'd be great if we could have a study session perhaps on and include parking as one of the main issues. If I can get. I'm sorry, but we're rather late already, 10 minutes past. Perhaps you can talk to him after that. If I can get a motion from council member to adjourn.
Oh, I motion to adjourn.
I second that.
Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.